Will Hinkson, my friend, welcome to the Human to Human podcast. So grateful to have you, brother.
Dude, Karan, so excited to be here, man.
Man, we met last year in Denver, and I still remember I was at a event. I saw this guy walks in, sharp looking guy, jacked, like looking shredded in his t-shirt, hair looking like Clark Kent, Superman. I'm like, man, who is this guy? I haven't seen him for the last couple of days. And then we got introduced by a mutual friend, Eric, and then we started chatting. I was like, man, this guy's a genius. I got to meet this guy. So I still remember that moment, man, meeting you
Dude,
for the first time.
I'm glad you saw it that way. So you mentioned Eric, who is, videographer to the stars, essentially. Eric's probably the best I know at filming, like, especially like entrepreneurial, like personal growth events, stuff like that. And I had met Eric at another event and we kind of became friends. He's like, oh, dude, I'm gonna be in Denver. You should come out. I talked to the guy who was running an event, totally cool. So I came in, but there was no room for me at any of the tables. So it was like the most awkward version of this where he's like, oh, well, let me just grab you a chair. So he grabs me a chair, sets it in. There's no table. I'm not near anybody else. I'm literally like this weirdo isolated out in the back. And I'm just like, if this was my event, I would feel weird about me sitting here right now. So I'm glad you saw it that way because I felt very differently at the time.
Yeah, man. You came in, you were sitting in the back by yourself, and a part of me, I was like, man, I hadn't seen this guy in the last couple of days. He must be new to the event, or maybe he just came out to check out the last day. And then obviously, of course, Eric introduced us. Anyways, long way to say, I'm really grateful I met you that day.
Dude, likewise. I remember that conversation to a T, man. As soon as we got done talking, I was like, dude, this guy's awesome. We got to connect more. And I think I sent you a couple of messages, like when I got home, like almost right away.
Yeah, and that's something that stood out. We talk about relationships quite a bit, and a recent guest, Michael Roderick, he says one of the quickest ways to stand out is actually follow up on what you say you're going to do. And sure enough, within like 2 hours of us leaving, you had already introduced me to all these people via email, and I was like, oh my God. And you had texted me. So right away, in my mind, you also stood out.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, right? That's like kind of all you have to do to stand out is like kind of just follow up with what you said you would do in a timely fashion. But I have found, it's an old cliche, like the fortunes in the follow up, but it's absolutely true. And quite frankly, even if you don't end up like, having business monetary gains, like you end up having human gains, which is kind of awesome.
Oh man, I think that should be the name of this episode, Human Gains 101.
It's got to be with a Z at the end of that.
I
That's
love it. Well, there's a bunch of stuff I want to talk to you about today. Super grateful to have you. I want to talk about self mastery, business growth mastery, leadership mastery, discipline. You're one of the most disciplined guys I know, and I really want to dive into that. But why don't we start with tell us a little bit about kind of how you got here today? And I don't mean here as in this podcast, but just give me a little bit of insight as to the last couple of years to the last couple of decades.
Yeah, brother. I mean, we kind of go back, so you know a little bit about my story. So I came kind of into the business world in a weirder way than most, which is I spent 10 years in the special operations community, whole bunch of combat deployments, whole bunch of shenanigans, all of that stuff, and then made this decision of like, all right, cool. I'm gonna exit this at 10 years, which normally, usually, kind of 10 years is the mark, right? Um, Typically people are kind of in it or out at 10 years, right? Because another 10 and you're cool. I was making good money at the time. I kind of hit, a pinnacle in my career, had some success and amazing people and all that stuff. And just decided, I didn't quite have the same enthusiasm that I used to for that job. But what I really did like was helping people, especially explore kind of their limits and push those and kind of rediscover themselves or discover that thing that they always knew that they had inside and explore that. So I left that, kind of used my savings that I'd saved up over 10 years and started up my first business, and I was off into the races. Flash forward, 5 years into that business, I'd done gone fall in love and moved out of that state. So I was managing it remotely, but just decided that I enjoyed working with my customers so much, but I wasn't there anymore and I didn't have quite the same passion. So I made the decision to exit that business, and I was able to have a successful exit, which is a whole process in and of itself. A year or so prior to that, I had started up my kind of coaching and consulting business. Was There's a very circuitous route there where you're trying to figure out what you're to do after an exit. I was the CMO for a production company, chief marketing officer for a production company for a little bit, and had an equity stake in it. I tried my hand at a couple of other things. That's where I met my business partner, who Kyle Berquist. And, flash forward through all that stuff, we kind of found this line of like, what are we really good at? What do we enjoy doing? And then how do we make the biggest impact to our customers to be able to make a dent inside of this world? And that is just shy of 20 years summed up right there.
Dude, what was the transition like going from special operations in that world where it's very, every second counts, every moment matters, every step matters in many regards. What was the transition like from special operations to operating your own business?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like in some ways it was a lot easier, in others it was a lot harder, right? For one, I had spent 10 years, essentially in combat, right? Like I had a whole lot of combat deployments, some ranging from relatively low in terms of kinetic, and some being very kinetic, very chaotic, right? So that has its own transition period. So like let's set that aside for a minute, and then talk about anybody who started up their own business knows that you are absolutely drinking from a fire hose in the beginning. You are trying to figure things out. You're trying to sort through information. There's a lot of people that sound really smart. Some of them are, and some of them aren't. And you're trying to figure out what applies, what makes sense to me, and you're going through this trial and error process. So on some ends, that was way easier for me, just because I had kind of planned this thing out for a while. I was kind of leading a little bit of this division that I had for where I was working at the time. So it took me a little bit to prepare to exit. It had to be super intentional. So I had the benefit of having a little bit over a year to really plan out this business, work the plan, go all that. So I think I had a little bit more time than most, or at least I had thought about it a lot more, right? And there's not a whole lot of personal life besides waking up, going to the gym. It was like, cool, wake up typically, got up super early, like 3:15, would go to the gym. I would have to leave my safe house, go in. I went in over to the embassy. I would go work out, then had a friend who lived on the embassy, so I would shower there, and then I would start my day. And then when I wrapped up my day, I would work on the business for at least an hour every night. So I had the advantage of time. I think the biggest mistake I made, because like you said, every step, kind of every thought, should be intentional. It isn't always. We can all pretend that special operations is a different breed, and it is, but they're still human, right? There's still mistakes made. They're smaller mistakes and they're harder corrections. So that way you can course correct faster. But I say all that to say, I was prepared, but one of the things that I struggled with was this. I remember leaving my last day, and I ended up, hopping in and going over to the Kabul airport and flying out for the last time. And I remember saying to myself, like, as the plane took off, like once we were kind of clear of, missile, mortar range and all that stuff, and I was like, all right, it's cool, I was like, if this thing fails, it won't be because I didn't work hard enough or explore the opportunities. And while that sounds really cool, and it is one of the reasons why I had success early on, it's what crushed me after I had success, because I was addicted to working hard, because I didn't really want to address the transition that came from that other piece that we set aside, which is how do you transition out of living most of your adult life in a combat zone to going to a hippie college town. And that was a transition that I had to deal with.
Man, that's so powerful. I think I know the answer, but are you still navigating your environment? Like after all these years, after being out of that space, is it still difficult at times to just like take yourself out of that state and just know that you're not back in combat anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I put a ton of work in on myself personally over the years. The first probably 3 years were the hardest. And I would say for everybody, you've got a period of like 18 months where you're transitioning no matter what. Right. But, after that kind of period of time, it got less and less. And I put in so much self work these days to kind of understand myself kind of on a deeper level and unpack, some of that stuff. Early on, it was harder. When you stop and you go, screw it, I'm going to deal with it. And then you start to unpack it and go through all that work, which is a lot of work, but it's worth it on the other side. What you end up having is, there's like a phrase, and it's kind of become a buzzword that's coming out these days amongst really the, therapy community, probably just because they have a bunch of us maniacs that were in combat for a lot longer and they haven't had this. But they call it post-traumatic growth, right? Which is on the other side of trauma resolved, you've got pretty massive growth that probably wouldn't exist there otherwise. And, I don't know, there's definitely some validity to that theory. I don't know if I totally buy into the whole thing, but I can tell you that fully resolved, I'm a better person because of that stuff. And I don't really deal with that anymore, right? I say that occasionally there's a few things that are just like deeply ingrained in you. Like if somebody's throwing a ball at you, right? Like if somebody throws a ball, you're gonna be like, if you have any sort of athletic background, you're just gonna catch that ball, right? Mm-hmm. This happened probably for the first time in like a year the other day. I was walking my daughter. I'm here in Denver. I'm in like a pretty nice neighborhood or whatever, and we've got a couple of nice parks right around us. I'm walking my daughter like I do every day in the afternoon after I wrap up work, and they were doing construction. Somebody dropped something probably off a forklift or a crane or something, but it hit real hard, and it's got kind of a reverberating effect that typically comes. It's very close to like if you have an explosion go off, something like that. And dude, for the first time in like forever, I ended up like, no questions asked, crouching, moved in front of my daughter, and then I was like, okay, so this isn't normal. Fully aware that I'm the only person here that's doing this. Like, it's not like you're like snapping out of that. And I think that's probably one of the most common misconceptions. I think about folks with my background, especially special operations, combat, all that, is like, they tend to either put that up on a pedestal, like you're larger than life and, it's some Rambo movie, or you're some fragile human that's about to break and just please don't snap on us. And neither are true, right? Humans are humans and experience is experience. But yeah, I had to kind of laugh at myself a little bit the other day. And then I kind of looked around like, anybody see me do that? Nope. Everybody else fine? It's just 4:15 on a Tuesday. All right, cool. Moving on.
Man, thanks for sharing that. I can imagine what your first reaction was like, of course, just thinking back of memories and just a different environment. But it sounds like, again, you've done so much work on yourself. And something I want to ask you based on what you just said as well is I feel like you are one of the most disciplined people I have ever met. Just from knowing you for the last year or so, seeing you in person, just talking to you on a weekly basis, there's something about you that it just, I perceive Will as always being on his game. You're always working out. You're always eating the right things. You're always crushing business. You're always reading. You're so disciplined. And I'm just curious, kind of, what tactics and strategies do you have in place to make sure that you set yourself up for success? And secondly, like what fuels and drives that discipline every day?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been like this. I just like experiencing life, right? I jokingly tell people that, like, especially when it comes to adrenaline, I'm always down for bad decisions, like pretty much at any time. But I think it boils down to this, man. After a certain amount of time and going after experiences and all that stuff, and sometimes overextending myself or having less than positive experiences there, what ended up kind of, and the way I look at it now is probably differently than most. Right? I think there's this perception that discipline is doing a bunch of stuff that you don't like and just doing it. I don't really look at it that way. I kind of look at it the opposite, which is I've got a bunch of stuff that I want to do. If I want to do that, what's the stuff I kind of need to do, right? If I want to be physically fit and compete and do all that stuff, well, then I need to be working out 5 days a week, right? It's not totally true for everybody. That's true for me. So if you're like, nope, I have to be working out 7 days a week or 3 days a week, that may be right for you. But what I'll tell you is 5 days is my sweet spot. But the way I look at that is I like to find where my flow is, right? There's plenty of stuff that works for other people that doesn't work for me, right? And I don't try to go, let me fight myself, right? And I'll give myself 2 to 4 weeks of something before I make a decision on it either way. If I decide it's valid and it's something that could help me with whatever, rock climbing or skydiving or, leaving an impact on this world or growing my business or connecting with awesome people, dude, I'm going to kind of do a little bit of research, figure out what people are saying works, try what I think is the best, right? It's like basic scientific process, right? Like I want to make a hypothesis and then I'm just going to do this thing. Let's see what comes out the other side. And at the end of like 2 to 4 weeks, depending on what it is, if I'm just like, yeah, I can see where this works, but I really don't like this, or it doesn't fit my life, I don't ever add judgment in there for me. I will just let something go until I find the thing that not only works, but it fits who I am. Because when I can step in that stream and just flow with it, then everything ends up being better. So for me, discipline isn't about fighting myself. I think there's a small period with something new where it's at a little bit. It's actually a lot more about how do I set this up so it works for me and I can just do it all the time. Because if it's not going to work all the time, or this isn't something like that's like whatever competition that I'm preparing for, so it's unique, then it probably doesn't make sense. Not long term. Because I'm not going to try to fight myself every single day. It just doesn't, it's not logical in my head,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds like your priorities are very much aligned with the type of person you want to be, the type of physical health you want, the type of life you want a year from today, 3 years from today, 5 years from today. So what you're saying is you're not really, I really like how you describe that. I think my head, when I hear the word discipline, immediately goes to like the negative, or what do I need to stop doing, or what do I need to remove? And I see it as this negative connotation at times. But what you're saying is that if you have that mindset, you've already lost.
Yeah, I mean, at least for me, right? Like, and don't get me wrong, you can be in a circumstance and a situation that requires discipline where you're doing something really, really hard. I'll be honest, when I've done really, really hard stuff over and over and over and over again, and before I kind of figured this out that I need to step into what works for me instead of trying to fight myself at every step, I didn't do that well on the stuff that required really hard circumstances, and I underperformed when I was there. That actually was the thing that led me to this. It was like, well, that's not working, or it's not working for me, or I'm not the right person for it. And I was like, well, no, I think I am the right person for this. I performed well here in this circumstance in the past. Why am I underperforming right now? And for me, it was because I was under recovering elsewhere. I was trying to fight so much that when a hard circumstance came up that it actually required me to be, what probably the common perception of discipline is, which is I'm going to, fight against the current and do this thing. And I'm going to, Rocky IV my way through this snow and do this whole thing, fighting the Russians. There's times for that, but if you're trying to do that all the time in your life, I just don't think it works long term. I think you end up having to fall in love with the process because you're just enjoying it in the second. And there's something special that happens when you're not fighting against yourself and you're not fighting against, perceptions around you. So, I mean, if we were to break this up, Karan, I'd say it probably looks like this, dude. Figure out what it is, the end result that you want. Kind of do some research, talk to some good people, potentially buy some programs or get around the right people, if you don't have access. From there, start to put that stuff into motion quickly, and then do it for like 2 to 4 weeks. And if at the end of that time, and by the way, I don't care about the result. Right? It matters a little bit. Other people have to be getting results. Like, that's important. But at the end of that, if you're still fighting against the process, it's just not going to work, right? And you and I have talked about this stuff in terms of business growth and all that. I figured this out for me. I've got a close friend of mine, and she grew, she's doing probably like $1.5 million a year, probably somewhere around that right now, pretty quickly. And one of the ways that she did that was she posted every day and still posts every day on social media. Well, I realized really quickly, I'm not that person. I'm not the person that wants to go and do that every day. So what I do now is I write my post ahead of time. I've got somebody who posts that, and I'm okay with going into social media every day and responding to that stuff. And it's still my words. It's not my words or my message. But I was just never the person that was like, oh, I want to wake up every day and think about my post on Facebook. Like, it's just not who I am. So even though I knew that worked, and I said, instead of fighting myself every day on that, let me figure out a way that I can still get the same end result that still works. And that's the process that I have now. So that just as like an example.
Yeah, and something I've learned after, being around you for some time is you're very quick at determining what tasks and objectives you actually love to do versus the ones that you have no time for. And where I'd love to take this conversation next is there's a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners listening to this. I'm guessing that a lot of people, 90% of the people listening, are still doing too much in their own business, myself included, hand up. I'll take full ownership there. But in your experience, Will, and I know you're a fan of, figuring out what are your needle movers and kind of delegating the rest. Talk to me a little bit about where you've seen or where you still see entrepreneurs try to do it all and how that keeps them stuck, and how would you go about addressing that?
Yeah, so I'll talk about this from kind of like a mid-level tactical view, and I'll talk about this from a high-level view. So the high level is this. If you haven't nailed down your business model and exactly what you do, how you do it, and who you serve, you're always going to be doing everything because you won't have a narrow focus. And if your focus is so wide and you don't have the team to support it, then you have to narrow your focus first, right? It was Clay Collins who founded Lead Pages, who said the fastest way to $1 million is the rule of ones, right? It's one offer, it's one audience, it's one traffic source, $1 million over 1 year, right? And I've found that to be extremely true, right? Not saying that if you have a bunch of SKUs or digital store that it can't work, it can. What I am saying is if you find yourself doing all the things all the time, most of the time it's because you haven't narrowed down your focus to what you do uniquely well. Once you figure out what it is you do uniquely well, then you have to figure out what's the business behind this. So how do I structure this in a way that makes sense for me? And there's a million different ways to figure out business models. But make sure you have one that at the end of the day, if you scale it up and you win, you don't hate your life, because that's kind of a bummer. To your point, Karen, how do I end up finding what it is that I should be focusing on or helping others to do the same? Is then we'll kind of break it down mid-level, right? And then we'll look across the areas of the business, right? What makes sense to focus on right now? If we're looking at, 6 core functions of business, there's really not that many. It's like lead generation, lead nurture. So you have a lead. How do you end up getting them excited and moving them into a sales process? So then you've got sales. Then you've got delivery, so customer happiness, customer retention, making sure they're happy long-term and stay with you. And then operational excellence. And operational excellence is just how well things are running behind the scenes. And then ultimately, it usually is the framework for how you end up delivering and how happy your customers end up being. Once I look at those, it's like, what do I need to focus on? And then create a plan around that. And then I just look at what is it only I uniquely can do. It might originally be, I'm still figuring this out, so I'm going to do this process for like a month. I'm going to write the SOP after I've done it like 2 or 3 times. And usually the way I'll do that is I'll just write it in steps, just write quick, right? You don't have to go super detailed. You're not trying to put together a Lego set. And if you ever went through that exercise in a college writing class, you don't have to make it that, right? because then you can just be nimble and, oh, cool, at the end of me doing this 10, 15 times, yeah, we changed this and it's different now. Let me dial that in. And then once I've got that, it's like, cool, what requires me in this process? If this is working to help grow my business or make my customers succeed more and win more, we should keep this. If we're going to keep this, what is it I need to be doing here, if anything? Decide that, and then I'm going to hand the rest off to a team. Or potentially bring in a team member for the first time if you don't have a team. Is that kind of your question, dude?
Yeah, man, absolutely. I love what you said about one offer, one audience, one traffic source. I think there's this inherent need or inherent expectation that we live on every single social media platform, and we have to be on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat and LinkedIn and Facebook and email marketing and guerrilla marketing and sending people postcards. And anyways, there's this notion of you have to be everywhere. Is there from a lead generation standpoint, I'm curious, because you've got a very fascinating business. From a lead generation standpoint, is there a source of traffic that you just love for yourself, like something you thoroughly enjoy when conversations form?
Yeah, good question. This one's interesting, right? Because sometimes it takes a little bit to crack this code on which one it is, and you will be trying a few more in the beginning to figure out what ends up, going. For me personally, I've found Facebook, and I'll tell you why, for no other reason than I'm kind of a writer, so I enjoy writing. I like to think that it's somewhat compelling. I've got a little bit of a direct response copywriting background, doing that for, like I said, I was experimenting in those in between times, doing that for other business, and that was a piece of how that business got off the ground, doing consulting here in Denver. And for me, Facebook has a longer character limit, and I kind of like putting together stuff that's fairly compelling once a week, and should probably tighten it up for LinkedIn, because that's kind of competing right now for me to see which traffic source is going to be better. But I like it just because that ends up creating really cool conversations. And then you and I have talked about this a lot, and there's nobody better than you out there at creating those conversations on social media, probably just in general. But we've talked about this, and I tightened up the way that I do reach out a little bit based on your process. But once you end up connecting with somebody, I love connecting inside Messenger with somebody. And even though I just said I'm a writer, I tend to like voice messages, just because you start to get kind of some inflection coming through. It just feels like you get to know somebody a little bit faster inside of that.
I love it, man. Yeah, your posts on Facebook, your posts on LinkedIn. Facebook is where I see most of them, but yeah, your copywriting abilities are insane. And anytime I've had you review some of my work, my jaw drops within 30 seconds of you talking, because you're like, well, that sounds good, but how about this? And within 30 seconds, my jaw is on the floor. I'm like, how do you do this, man? It's just, anyways, big props to you, man. You are a genius when it comes to copywriting, no question.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, it's just practice, right? Like anything. I say copywriters come in like 4 forms. You've got new copywriters, which structurally they're horrible, but if they're talking to their audience, especially if they're a business owner, they end up actually doing pretty well. Even though structurally you would look at it and you'd be like, that will not convert. But they end up speaking to the heart of their customers so well and so authentically it does. Then you've got kind of the stage 2. Stage 2 copywriters, and I'll speak for myself here, are the worst, right? I was the worst here. You start to learn a lot about copywriting and all these structures and persuasion, and you kind of lose a little bit track of your message, or I know I did. And what it comes to is, instead of talking to somebody in a compelling way, you're essentially trying to manipulate your audience, which is really bad when you think about it. And I think that's where a lot of people who like kind of enter into the world of copywriting, because there's all of this talk of like, right words make money, right words make money. And it goes back to direct response principles going back to like the 20s. If you look at Robert Collier letter book, it was like published in, I think it was like 1919, something like that. Dude, all those principles carry forward. but it's all direct. It's like the earliest form of direct response. So that's where like the world of direct response copywriting got its start. And you know, stage 2 is manipulation. Stage 3 is you're like starting to tie your message back and realize like, oh no, I need a unified message. And you start to kind of go through that and you're like, oh, but I also need to serve my customer because my content will probably serve way more people than I'll ever have clients. So somebody who's never going to be a client can still get their life changed by reading this and impacted. And that's probably way more important, right? And then, you know, stage 4, which is not a stage I'm at, are the legends in that world who just write stuff and you just go, that's incredible. You know, the Perry Belchers of the world where you're just reading this and you're like, dude, I'm just impressed. Like, I'm happy you went in the for-profit world so I can spend a couple of $1,000s to spend a weekend with you and learn this stuff. Because if you just chose to author books, I'd never be able to sit down with Stephen King or somebody like that, but I can sit down with a direct response copywriter.
Yeah, I think it's a very underrated skill. It's like those who can write and tell stories and craft and take words and add emotions and inflections into their voice even. I don't know how people do that, but it just blows my mind sometimes when I'm reading copy. I'm like, ding, 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 that's me. How did you know? It's really fascinating stuff, man. I have another question on the business mastery side of things. We talked about the one offer, wearing all the hats in their business. Is there, I guess, are there more common mistakes you see? You know, you've been an entrepreneur for quite some time, but when you're talking to entrepreneurs at any level, are there common mistakes or common patterns that you see them kind of stuck in, and how do you get them out of that?
Yeah, great question. Common mistakes. Yeah, if we look across kind of all areas and spectrums, I think it's probably, here's the biggest common mistake I see. It's not as good as you think, and it's not as bad as you think. What I mean by that, if you've ever talked to somebody that are like, my whole business is burning, everything's going to the ground, I'm totally screwed, you're probably not. I had a friend say one time, and I think this is pretty true for small businesses, most medium-sized businesses, not as much large businesses when you're getting into like, you know, billions and all that. But he's like, dude, you're basically 3 decisions away from either tanking your business or doubling your business. And I think when you have that perspective and you start to realize like, yes, fires are going to come up. Yes, you're going to have to miss holidays. Yes, occasionally you're going to piss off a customer. If you run any sort of ads on a social media platform, you're going to get trolls that are going to make you question your life because there's a special type of person that has to get, you know, the woes of their life out on your Facebook post directed at you. That stuff will come, but it's never as bad, but it's also usually never as good as you think, right? This happened yesterday, 2 days ago. I was talking with my business partner, Kyle, and we've got 2 brands. We've got the brand that I'm the face of and run, Scale Through Impact, and the one that he's the face of, and he was, you know, Kyle, but he was a chiropractor, had fully integrated clinics, and had 9 clinics. We've been working on his offer for a while, and I think we cracked it. And we ended up at the end of the session looking at it, and I was like, I think this is legitimately like probably a $5 to $10 million a year offer right here with what we have. Looking at the landscape of it, mapping it across the industry, and even still for me, coaching people on this stuff. Right? So I still wrapped up, you know, like I do every day at 4, took my daughter for a walk, and I texted an old friend who's kind of a legend in the direct response world. I was like, dude, I'm kind of excited about something. I would love to sanity check because I'm overexcited right now on this offer and see if I'm rightfully excited or not. And, you know, he texted me back and we talked for a couple minutes. He's like, yeah, dude, I think legitimately, you know, based on what you're telling me, it is the right offer for that. And I think, yeah, it's a $5 to $10 million a year offer. He's like, but what are you going to do next? I was like, well, there's a couple things I could do. He's like, yeah, cool. He's like, you literally help people do this. Like, just go through your own process. And I think that's one of the things that we get stuck in these entrepreneurial highs and lows of this roller coaster of I'm a genius, I'm going to change the face of the entire world, or oh my God, everything's burning. There's no way I'm going to be able to pull myself out of this, and I made every mistake and I don't know what to do and I'm feeling bad about myself. And I think the key to it is stabilizing this thing out a little bit. So that way you've got a little bit of perspective, you've got the stuff in place so you can be successful long term instead of having to ride that roller coaster. Because having done it for the first, God, probably 4 or 5 years in my business, and you just end up burnt out at the end of that. So yeah,
Man,
I would say it's not as good as you think, and it's not as bad as you think.
I love that. And I've had many situations where I'm like, oh my God, I'm a genius and this is going to change the world, to the next day or the next hour sometimes saying, I wonder if LinkedIn, I wonder if anyone's hiring these days. It's such a up and down sometimes. Although I would never go back to a job, just full transparency for anyone listening. I will never go back to,
Well,
a
let's talk
corporate.
about that for a second, right? I've talked about this with a lot of friends. It's an entrepreneurial fantasy we have to think that we could go work for somebody else. So like, and everybody has it, by the way. Doesn't matter the success you have. Like, dude, how often would you say that idea pops into your head a month? Like legit.
Man, maybe once, like not a lot.
Yeah, and I'm about the same, but it's still about once a month.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm pretty good copywriting, but I'm actually probably better at sales when I believe in the product, right? It's a piece that I love because I love people. And sales is really about understanding and serving people. Like, dude, I've got friends that are hiring that have reached out, and that's like, legit, like probably 25, 30 hours a week, and probably like an extra 40, 50K a month, like, but directly to me as opposed to like there. And looking at that stuff, like occasionally, the thought doesn't go so far, but it's okay if you're having the thought for anybody out there that's like, oh, I totally think about that. Like, don't beat yourself up over the thought. The thought's going to come. It's all about the actions you take afterward.
Yeah, there's been many moments. I've had Jube operating officially, I would say, for about 14 months. And, 3 months in, it was this honeymoon phase was starting to dip. And I said, oh shit, I actually got to start making some money now. And then 6 months in, I was like, oh, I'm 6 months in, I should probably be further ahead. And now I'm 14 months in and I'm making, more than I did at my 9 to 5 job, but still there's this aspect of something's missing. And that's something I'm definitely battling with right now. I'm happier than ever before, not in a corporate job, now building my own business. And I still feel like there's this arrival syndrome in the future waiting for me. And it's something I'm battling myself right now, is this notion of just being in the moment and present and happy with what I have versus what I could have. And maybe a byproduct of that is also hanging out with smart entrepreneurs that are further ahead than me. So I would say there's definitely some comparison. And I hate to say that word because I'm generally not the type of person who compares myself to anybody for any regard. But there's definitely this sense of, how have I not cracked the code yet?
Yeah. So, it's kind of interesting. I'm a writer by nature. So every morning for 20 minutes, I do a free writing session. And then once a week, I'll put that into a long form video and then usually create some copy out of that, right? This morning, I actually kind of wrote about this exact thing, which is because you said it, there's like this arrival syndrome. And it's one of those things that we can think is like, oh, if I only get to this piece, right? And I titled that piece of content, The Mindset Difference Between Successful Installed Online Entrepreneurs, and the mindset difference between being installed or being a warrior is if I get X, Y, and Z installed, or I hit this amount of revenue, I will have arrived. The difference of a warrior is this. See this stuff, I'm going to implement quickly, and I'm going to keep adjusting along the way and figuring it out, because I know that there is no arrival. You're going to adjust as you go, because my business is a living, breathing entity that's going to change, and I'm going to change as it grows. So to say like, oh, if I only, and I fell into this trap for a long time. If I only put in this killer sequence in Infusionsoft, if I only can get an extra 100 leads a month, if I only can do this, and the truth is then you'll break other stuff in your business, and that's okay. what's fun about it is when you can let go of the arrival, still make sure you're progressing, but go, hey, I'm going to implement really quickly because there's no reason I have to wait to do that. I'm going to figure this out really fast. I'm going to install this, test it small, and then scale it up and adjust really quickly. So in the next, dude, sometimes it's like days. I can have this thing that I originally was thinking about having in a couple of years inside of my business or my life.
Well said, Ben. Really appreciate you sharing that. There's definitely and it's something me and my partner talk about a lot. And she doesn't have arrival syndrome at all. Like I think she just thinks differently. She's been an entrepreneur much longer than I. I'm kind of newish compared to her in that sense. But yeah, it's this, falling in love with the process. I think it's something you said earlier, falling in love with every single day and just putting in a hard day, creating some of these containers. You said that you stop work at 4. That's kind of your non-negotiables. You hang out with your daughter every day. You walk her. You work out. You've got these non-negotiables. It's so important for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll block myself in hard, right? Like our nanny leaves at 4. I am done at 4. It doesn't matter if I'm on a group sales call and about to sign up 30 people. I am done at 4 every day, no matter what. Mm-hmm. By the way, I've never signed up 30 people on a group sales call, but that would be like the craziest scenario where I still would have to be done at 4.
Dude, I love it. Man, I know we've only got about maybe 10 or 15 minutes or so left. I want to talk about leadership mastery. Tell me what you mean by leadership mastery and how can we all benefit?
Yeah, this is one where my time in the special operations community and leading, some of the best human beings on the planet, and being led by some of the best human beings on the planet, made a difference. And I think there's a huge misunderstanding out there on what leadership is and what leadership isn't. Man, I've seen it everything from like yelling at people to, letting people do whatever they want, and everything in between. And in my mind, it's setting somebody up for success, but also making them feel comfortable. And I know that sounds a little bit weird, especially in the context of coming from the special operations community. But I look at this as like, number one, is the right person in the right seat, right? Which an old Jim Collins thing is good to great. But I look at like, are you a good fit for the role? Because it doesn't matter if you're the best culture fit on the planet. If I just set you up for failure in the role, it's not going to work. And on the flip side, if you're the best technician at this thing that I'm bringing you in to do, but you're a bad culture fit, we're a team and we're a family, so that's not going to work either. So you have to have a blend of both. And somebody, they don't have to be technically perfect, but they have to have the aptitude to be and be coached. So I look at how do I establish really clear expectations up front? And I would rather have clear, hard expectations. You don't have to be a jerk about it. Like, don't be a dick, but hopefully that's okay to say here. But, right, your expectations should be clear, and then you should be supportive. Coming down from there, it's all about how do I train somebody and put the time into somebody to make them feel seen, feel heard, and feel empowered in their role. And the way that I do that inside of training, it's an old military adage, actually, at least in my world it was, crawl, walk, run, right? So the way that works sometimes is watch one, do one, teach one. And that's kind of the way I approach stuff. It's like, let's establish a true training period so you can feel comfortable. Let's bring you in to understand what the company overall very clearly is doing, because if you don't have a clear view of what we're doing here, you're not going to be able to tie your role day to day into that and understand how we're helping people, because we're not just signing up people and taking their money. We're dramatically changing and influencing economies worldwide, people's lives worldwide, and everybody that they touch, everybody that comes into their company because they were able to grow. Like, that's a big deal. And it's something I take really seriously, but I also get to celebrate it. And anybody that's on the team, I want them to be able to do the same. So tying into the big picture is important. Going back to watch one, do one, teach one. The way that I do this is we've got the SOP. I have them look over whatever the primary SOPs are for their job. And then take a couple days, go through that, and then let's go through this together. You can watch me doing this process. I want you to take notes, and at the end of every phase, as long as it's not something live with clients, right? Like, let's pause, and I want you to ask any questions you have, right? So we go through that process, and then usually I'll record that if it's something that's, digital, since, I run, digital work office and, have folks all over the world on the team, which is incredible. And then I'll send that to them. So that way they ask the questions and kind of review that if they want to. And then we'll set a meeting for a couple days after that where they'll do it. And then at the end of every phase, I'll ask some questions. And I want to emphasize that even more than my tone did. There's a tendency when we know stuff inside and out to go, oh, no, don't do it like that, right? As they're doing it. It's not a great way to learn. It's good to break it down into phases, but it's not a great thing to interrupt somebody as they're figuring something out because you expect them to do it as good as you do, even though you've been doing this for years, right? Or you quite literally wrote the manual on this. So then go through that, same thing, record it, send that to them. And then at the end of that, a few days after that, I want them to teach me. So bring me on and then teach me how to do something, right? Tell me where to go. Tell me how to do it. Tell me what we're looking for. And it's a little bit more than just like the rote task of going through. It's actually figuring out where's that person's mindset at, what are they thinking about, and how do I adjust that a little bit along the way? And that process works better than anything else I've seen, as long as you have a halfway decent SOP in there. And then bringing people in, guiding them along the way, making them feel seen and heard, making them feel part of our bigger mission, what we're doing, and doing the thing that most entrepreneurs hate doing. And I understand who we're talking to, and I understand the emotions that you're going to have, which is actually setting a quarterly meeting to review their work and going through with them and having an all hands meeting once a week. And I get it. There's so many of us, and I fought this for years, that don't want to do meetings because we feel tied down and it's going to stifle my creativity. But man, when you can get in there and start to do this, people start to thrive and your business becomes more than you. And quite frankly, I have more than not, I would say probably 80% of the people or 80% of the stuff that people took over that I was doing, after a little bit of time, they end up doing it way better than I do. In my mind, that's leadership. You make corrections where you need to, you review frequently, you enroll them in the greater mission that your company's in, and you make sure they're set up for success. If you can do that, you're probably doing pretty good.
Bro, I love that. I love what you said about getting somebody on your team to teach you how to do the process a week or two later. I am 100% putting that in my toolkit today.
Awesome, man.
Dude,
Take it,
I love
it's yours.
I've got just two final questions. These are more kind of fun questions before I ask you where people can find you. But I know you're a big fan of books. You're a big fan of personal development, growth. You've been on quite the journey yourself. Do you have any must-read books that you often recommend? Any books that you give away to your friends? Any books that you feel like entrepreneurs should absolutely read?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot of good books out there. Mike Michalowicz, just in general, comes to mind if you're looking to see how to kind of structure a business or the way to go. Yeah, when we talk about personal development, it's so unique for everybody. But I think one that, for years I went back and read each and every year was How to Win Friends and Influence People from Dale Carnegie. It's just one of those where it's like, it's good business sense, but it's also kind of good human sense. And one of the things that especially, my first business, so much of our staff was like 19 to 24, right? Because it was fitness and it was wellness. As we expanded into a wellness center, that wasn't the case. We had, doctors and all that, but it was one of those things where every year everybody would have to go back through it. We had people that are like 3-4 years in, and I thought I was going to get kickback. And every time they're like, oh, yeah, dude, I totally understand this now. I thought I was applying it, but I wasn't. And anytime I see stuff like that, it's like, yeah, that's a classic.
Dude, I love it.
I encourage people to do just in terms of books. There is definitely some unique stuff out there. But a lot of the stuff that we end up reading today is, and I don't want to diminish any great stuff because there's a lot of great stuff, but a lot of it has an origin, right? And those origins typically are a lot of books in the 20s and 30s. So kind of encourage you to go back, and if you're interested in a subject, there's probably some foundational text that gives you context for everything that's coming out today. And there's like probably 15 books that I've got on my shelf that you can kind of see like everything in the business world and marketing and sales world came from. Like,
Will you send me a photo of that? I'd love to include that in the show notes.
Yeah, I mean, my wife and I are huge readers. They're kind of all over, but I'll send you a picture of my bookshelf over here that's got just some of the new ones, some of the old ones. But yeah, happy to do it.
Dude, amazing. And my last question, Will, is this, and I ask all my guests this question. Tomorrow morning, the entire world wakes up. Every city, every country, every continent opens up their blinds, and everybody is looking at the exact same billboard. But Will gets to control the message on the billboard. What would you share with the world?
What would I share if everybody was looking at it? By the way, I'm realizing I've seen all your stuff on social, but clearly I've missed this at the very end of that. This is a great question. Consider somebody else's point of view. And I think whether you're in business, whether you're just a human doing the thing, I think one of the biggest things I think right now that's a problem is we're so polarized on one side or the other. And we tend to root in really hard on kind of dogma and all of that stuff. And quite frankly, if you want to get ahead in business, you understand your customer a little bit better, and you're going to skyrocket, by the way, because you'll find a solution for them. But I think in general in life, like if you want to just be a decent human being, it's okay to disagree with somebody, but try to figure out where they're coming from. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to do any of that stuff. But I think if you were to do that, we'd be sitting in, maybe a little bit friendlier times and doing a little bit cooler stuff instead of fighting social media politic wars.
Consider someone else's point of view, man. I totally agree with you there. Will, where is the best place for people to find you and hit you up after this podcast?
Yeah, if you guys are on Facebook, you can just search Will Hinkson. It's just a picture of my mug, and then my wife and our dog, I think, is my background photo right now. I'm on LinkedIn as well, Instagram, all that stuff. Or you can check out my website if you want to kind of talk about what it would look like to do a little bit more, diving deeper into self-mastery, having all the tools and all the strategies we use for business growth and leadership. So you can just plug it into your business. You can go to warriorsguidetobusiness.com. You'll see an Awakening Warrior interview. Book that in with me because I would love to talk to you and just see where I can help you out.
And guys, Will is truly one of the best when it comes to just giving knowledge, openly sharing. He can, within 15 minutes of talking to this guy, he'll completely just give you a brand new business to walk away with. So definitely take him up on that. Will, it's been such an honor to have you on the podcast, my friend. So grateful that you walked into that event room in Denver looking awkward, sitting by yourself. I'm super grateful that we had an opportunity to connect and the relationship that we've built since. And yeah, it's really grateful to call you a friend, my friend.
Yeah, likewise, brother. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, man.